You're listening to Therapy for Your Money, a podcast about all things money and finance for therapy practice owners. If you want to feel confident and in control of your financial life, then you've come to the right spot. I'm your host, Julie Harris. I'm an accountant and the owner of Green Oak Accounting. My firm specializes in working with private practices across the US, and my team and I have worked with hundreds of private practice owners. I'm on a mission to share all the best practices I've learned along the way because I want you to have a profitable private practice. Hi everyone, welcome back to Therapy for Your Money. Today we are talking about adding additional streams of income to your life and to your business. My guest is Katie Vernoy from Therapy Reimagined. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Yay, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to chat with you today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and all the different things that you do.
Okay, so I'll try to be short because there's a lot. When you talk about additional streams of income, or even just for me, it's about additional interests that I'm pursuing. There's a lot, so I'll be short. So I'm Katie Vernoy. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm out in LA area in California. And the three things, and there's like subparts and participles. There's all kinds of stuff in here, but the three main things that I do, I have a therapy practice, I do coaching and consulting, and I have Therapy Reimagined, which is a podcast, the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, as well as a conference, which is Therapy Reimagined. And the focus of what I do overall is making sure that leaders, entrepreneurs, helping professionals are able to truly step into leadership and be able to create a career that they can sustain and a life that they want to enjoy.
I love that. And that's why you're a perfect guest for this episode. So obviously you have your own practice. At what point did you decide that you wanted to add other streams of income to the practice? Or was it more, it sounds like it was almost more interest related than income related.
Yes. And actually I started private practice while I was still working in public mental health. It was kind of my escape parachute almost. And it was also something where it gave me a foot back into the clinical world. I was working as a director for a mental health organization, or I guess a division within a mental health organization. And I was working with high intensity cases or overseeing them. I guess I wasn't working with them directly, and doing a lot of proposal writing, a lot of managing, a lot of budgeting. There was just a lot that was going on. And I definitely burned out. It was no longer a fit. I would read a job posting and I would get exhausted by the end of it. And so I kind of kept this private practice going. And when I left public mental health, I just kept the private practice. And then I was bored.
Not enough to do.
Well, and because I've been doing all these other things, right? I've been doing managing people. I had been, creating programs. I had some programs that won awards. It was so exciting to get into the juiciness of how do you take a public kind of a publicly funded program, get through all of the compliance and the details and get to a program and then actually have it be effective for your clients and for the clinicians who had to implement it. There was so much that I enjoyed that I decided I wanted to do some consulting. I realized that sitting and doing that kind of one-on-one therapy work, because I don't like couples counseling, and I was doing some groups, so it wasn't just one-on-one, but just having a therapy practice wasn't stimulating enough for me. And I knew that there was also, a lot of folks talk about adding a revenue stream, either to make it passive or adding a revenue stream to get you beyond the hour, kind of the hour for dollar kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there was some of that, but I think for me, it was more about trying to create a career that was interesting enough, with enough options and diversity and that kind of stuff within what I did on a day-to-day basis to keep it sustainable for me.
Okay. So what was the next stop then? Once you decided the private practice is not quite enough for you to feel fulfilled, what did you add next?
I actually added grant writing, of all things.
Really?
Yeah. And I did it for a little while, and I absolutely do not do it anymore. It was not the right thing. But I was in my public mental health. I was I was writing for, different kinds of proposals. There was requests for proposals for a lot of different programs to get funding. And so I enjoyed doing it there. But then when I had to do it for clients, I was like, not so much for me, but I went from there and started doing more traditional consulting. So nonprofit consulting with different types of agencies, helping them out. And then I recognized within the community, there was a business acumen, there was a leadership knowledge that I had that a lot of my colleagues didn't. And so I think I started with teaching newly kind of graduated MFT students how to get jobs. And then I started working with people who were going to hire MFTs. And so then it just kind of, or hire clinicians. And so it started kind of formulated into this hybrid coaching consulting around therapist career stuff.
Got it. And
that's the branding language, right? Career stuff.
Career stuff. The stuff is the key word here.
Yes. The very key word is stuff.
And so as you were moving into this stuff, the career stuff, how are you finding those clients?
A lot of it was word of mouth. I think there were definitely times when I'm not going to say I'm a total expert, because I do have a lot of introverted traits within me, and I definitely need downtime, which I uncovered after I had basically been networking 15 hours a day for weeks on end. So I was like, whoa, that was way too much. But it really was about networking, identifying who I really connected with. I joined just a networking group that was all types of folks, not just therapists. It was BNI, Business Network International,
yeah,
for folks who know. And so I did that for a couple of years. I got very involved in my professional association. And so I was president of the local chapter. And then right now, I guess I'm past president of the state CAMP, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. But for me, it really became networking and identifying how I could help the person in front of me, and how that person could then collaborate with me, how they could be part of my team, right? The people who know what I do, know how I can help people, and we can kind of support each other. And so I think my first grant writing gig was because I was networking with a psychiatrist who was on a board, and it was just like, it was pretty convoluted. But for me, a lot of the work came from networking and creating the relationships with people who I just really valued and knew that I needed to have in my professional circle.
Got it. And so as you were getting that piece off the ground, how were you pricing that? Like how did you determine how you were going to charge people for that? Because I'm sure that's a question that comes up a lot for our listeners. Like, sure, I can do this, but how do I even begin to price that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is like not well at first, very poorly, in fact. Well, I think that, and I think a lot of therapists suffer from this, but it's like, okay, we get into this idea of what is a good hourly rate. And even if we're doing projects, we start thinking about it in an hourly standpoint. So I was like, okay. And I think at the time my fee was $125 or $150 an hour. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But like I would say, okay, well, if I'm going to do this retainer for someone where I'm doing grant writing and I'm doing program development, I'm doing that kind of stuff. Okay, if I'm going to spend about this many hours, then I want to make about this much money. Like I was doing it in a way that once you're to a lump sum and you're doing a project, you don't want to do it by the hour, because it really doesn't ever line up that way. There are going to be folks who underutilize you and you feel horrible because you feel like you're charging them too much because of the hours. Very rare. In fact, most of the time, I would be doing hours and hours and hours and wanting to show up and do as much as I could, over deliver, do all of this stuff. And I would end up and I would figure it out like, well, hourly, I think I made about $15 to $20 an hour by the end of it, right? It was just, it was something where I had just so underestimated what I would want to do for these clients. And I had underestimated my ability to set boundaries around what scope of work was, around my time, around trying to get prioritization. So long story short, I didn't do it well at first. I undervalued my time. I tried to align it with time, and didn't really look at, okay, what does this project mean for this business? What is the value they get, and what will feel good to me as far as, the time, resources, time away from other things. And and it's gotten better, but it's still not perfect.
Got it. Yeah, I completely understand. But when you started, it was based on like, here's how much I would make for a clinical hour, basically. Like, let's get around in that ballpark. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and then I would realize, well, I'm not going to do this many clinical hours. So then I started negotiating with myself. Okay, well, if they're going to pay me for 10 hours, then maybe I can diminish that amount. Well, if they're going to pay me for 15 hours, then I can diminish it again. And I think there is a credibility to that because, like not all hours are equal.
Sure.
Right. But certainly it wasn't like, oh, well, every hour is going to be this amount. I think if people want to do it by the hour, actually count the hours.
Versus just estimating.
Versus a flat rate up front.
Okay. That's fair. And it sounds like what the kind of coaching and consulting you do these days is not as much career related as other things, right?
I think it really still has the roots in the career stuff. I think what it ends up being is that I feel like I'm looking for folks, or I'm helping folks to find the way that they create sustainability in their career. And so oftentimes by the time they find me, they've got their private practices up and running. They're completely overwhelmed because they've got the clients coming in, but they don't have the systems in place to sustain it. They've started thinking about an alternate revenue stream or taking on an associate or something. And so they're like, I don't know how to have the time for that. But once I get to the other side, my life will be better. So I'm just going to start throwing stuff at it. And it's like, well, no, that's not really how it works. But so it's identifying how do you step into leadership at whatever stage you are, and then creating the career work-life balance that you want. So it's not usually at this point helping people with their resumes and interview skills, although I still do that on occasion. But it is kind of those folks who are ready to take the next step and get their careers more aligned because they've hit the wall of what they're able to do. And sometimes that even includes like recruiting and stuff. So there's still always a career element for me where it's, how do you manage your people? How do you hire them? How do you decide who to hire? How do you set up your time? It's those kinds of things. It's that manager, director, leader thing that we do that I think isn't really taught very well.
The career piece is hiding in there.
Yes. Yes.
So coaching is also one-on-one, right? Just like therapy. So a lot of times I hear therapists want to look for something that's actually not one-on-one, that where it might be one-to-many, or where they might not be needed at all, right? Where it's not really trading, dollars for hours. So how did you decide that coaching was a good fit for you when it's, in a sense, similar to therapy in the time requirement for you?
Well, I think there's a lot of different types of coaching. And I think initially I was doing group coaching, which is one to a few more rather than one to many. To me, I don't know that I've ever wanted to do a ton of one-to-many stuff, although I do have a podcast and a conference, which is one-to-many. So sure. I guess I have to step away from that. But that was more, I backed into that because of interest, not necessarily trying to do some of these other things. But I think for me, coaching made a lot of sense because I missed the mentorship of supervising supervisors or supervising clinicians. I missed the mentorship of those, kind of newer students who would, because every once in a while I'll go speak at a university and talk with them about how they can imagine their career and what possibilities are there for them. For me, it was, yes, I can do that with therapy clients to a certain extent, but it's a different relationship when you're a coach or a consultant. And so for me, that was my interest. But I think when I talk to folks about wanting to stop trading hours for dollars or doing one-to-many versus one-to-one, I think there's a lot of pieces where it becomes why I moved into podcasting and some of the other things is that bigger impact. Because I feel like when we're just in this situation where we're one-to-one, we may have a huge impact on the person sitting in front of us. And that person may impact a ton of people. So we may have a big impact on the world, but it's through the portal of just one person, one interaction at a time. Whereas if I can have a podcast that speaks to a lot of people, or I can do something, I can put out a book, or I can do a training, or I can put together a course that can serve so many people. Now, first off, there's potential for revenue when I'm not actually actively working.
Right.
But there's also this ability to get this broader message further, to be able to serve anyone who's coming across your path. Not that you would choose to serve anyone, but that you could. Whereas as a therapist, you're stuck by, licensing agreement, licensure, like, am I licensed in the state? What is the relationship? Whereas when you get out into some of these other types of activities or revenue streams or whatever, I think it becomes this notion that I now can not just say I'm helping the world because of the person in front of me, but that I'm actually trying to help the world, or, some larger community of folks. And so for me, it's about the bigger impact.
So speaking of the, the podcast and the event, so how did those come about? How did those get added to your plate, to your, the things that you do?
It's interesting. I think the biggest piece that I think determined it was the conversations I was having with one of my colleagues, Kurt Woodhelm. He's my
co-host,
husband, so to speak. He's my co-host on the podcast. He is the co-founder of the conference, and he and I were on the state board for the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists at the same time. And so we would be on these board meeting trips, and we would be just sitting and talking with each other about so many of the different things that we were seeing with our profession that we felt weren't being talked about, weren't being tied back to the profession. Because I think part of it is like, okay, there's like legal and ethical stuff that's kind of too ethereal in a lot of ways. There's business stuff that is not tied back to clinical at all. There's a lot of cultural nuance that is just lost in a lot of multicultural trainings. And so it was something where we're looking at how many educational gaps there were and truly enjoying the conversations we were having. And so we decided, let's put together a conference that we would actually want to attend. And so it started with the conference, although the podcast came first, but the conference was our end goal. And we realized if we wanted to actually do a conference and have people come, we needed to have an audience. So then we started the podcast so that we could start getting the word out, trying to help people understand what this Therapy Reimagined concept was, why we thought that it was important for people to be innovative while still grounding themselves in laws and ethics and clinical excellence, and being able to pull in business education that was relevant to therapists in a way that actually informs decision-making. I mean, when I think about what you do, I mean, I could go to a lot of different things, but being able to, for a therapist to plan how they actually earn their money, save it, spend it, all of those things, to have that picture laid out could feel irrelevant to what's happening in the room, but it's so not. Right. I mean, it's if somebody doesn't know if they're going to be able to pay for their health record, for example, like they're not going to be necessarily focused on the client, except as potentially the revenue, the dollars that are coming in when they see that person, if they're in that real almost fight or flight around their money. And so knowing they've taken care of it helps them in the room. But even like what you talked about in the beginning, the fee setting, those kinds of things, there's clinical impacts for all of those things. So anyway, I'm going off the rails here, but like for us, it was like, okay, let's figure out how we can actually start doing this kind of education, how we can bring together folks who get that this is the important stuff to do. And so then the podcast and the conference were born.
Got it. And so it's, again, very much mission driven,
Yes.
but then by consequence, adding a stream of income as it should be, right? If you're doing something this important that serves the world,
Yeah.
you should be compensated for it. That is a very natural thing to do. And yet that's something that comes often with shame, for therapists, right? Like, oh, I know, maybe I shouldn't be making money doing this, but absolutely. So, so those are the streams of income you've chosen. Before we started recording, you mentioned you may have also tried other things that were a little less successful. Have you heard of, what are some other alternate revenue streams that work well in mental health?
I think a lot of folks will go to courses because these are things that feel like they can become passive. You record a course, you put it on some sort of a course platform, and then people find it and purchase it, and you don't have a lot to do. I'm not sure that they're actually that passive, but that's the notion. A lot of people look at books as a potential way to do alternative revenue. I think that one, in some ways, that's one that I tried. I've basically gotten 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, I think 2 or 3 books, and I haven't finished them. I hate to say that. Maybe I shouldn't admit that, but it's something where my interest wanes, or I haven't quite got to the point where I want to do it. And it also feels like there are books that make money and there's books that are primarily marketing tools.
Sure.
So I think there's some things there. There's speaking, there's teaching, within universities and those kinds of things. There's a lot of different types of revenue, kind of things that we can do with our degrees, with our careers that are different. I think for me, when I was referring to the things that didn't quite work out, certainly the book thing, I've announced on different times, like, oh, I'm writing this book. And I've not had any books come out.
Okay.
And it's something where I enjoy writing, but I never can complete it. It is the tale of every person, except for a few people who can just like knock out books like it's nobody's business. But like I've heard so many people where they get to a certain point and they just can't finish the book. And I know some great book coaches, and I haven't chosen to follow up that path yet, but there's that. I think the other thing was the grant writing. That just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And I think some people wanted me to do more like copywriting for their marketing stuff, because I have a marketing, not expertise necessarily, but a marketing flair. And so like I can help my clients with marketing, but when they want me to start going down the road of like, let's write your copy. Yeah, that's never worked for me when I've had to do that.
Got it. So the writing is not for you.
Apparently. And I love writing. So I'm going to have to talk to my therapist about this.
That's a good idea. So one question I have for you is, how do you keep the balance or decide how much time you're going to devote to each of your activities, each of your streams of income?
The biggest thing that I've uncovered over the years is that my focus is usually only effective on 1 or 2 things at a time, and not like in the moment, because usually it's important to recognize multitasking is not really a thing. You're just changing back and forth really fast. So for me, like I can have a therapy practice and focus a lot of attention on my conference or Kurt's in my conference, for example. But then also like doing heavy duty marketing for my consulting business doesn't happen. So I think coming to that acceptance and recognizing there are seasons through the year of when I spend more time on one thing or another. Obviously, if the conference is coming up, I'm going to focus most of my attention on that. If it's January, I'm probably focusing on consulting and coaching, because a lot of people are wanting to get their, I guess, end of the year. So right around now, when we're recording, is when folks are wanting to do some strategic planning and getting ready for the new year. And then there's also periods of time where things are generally slower, like in the summer, for most folks. But on a smaller scale, like on a weekly scale, I do time blocking. I don't know that this is not, something amazing and new, but I do say like Mondays are mostly conference and self-care. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are primarily, Tuesday and Wednesday are therapy practice days. Thursday is a conference day. Thursday afternoon and Friday are my consulting. So I kind of
got it.
Put things together. And then it also means that Tuesday, Wednesday are the only really tightly weekly scheduled stuff, whereas the rest of the week flows a little bit more. So I can take longer weekends, or I can, do full day strategy sessions on Mondays or Fridays without displacing therapy clients.
Your clients.
Yeah. So it's trying to focus attention on one thing at a time. That does not always work. But trying to have blocks that are specific to the type of business, and then also thinking about how scheduling would work. I've got automated schedulers and different stuff so that I can make sure that I don't get double booked or get too many things on my calendar, those kinds of things.
Okay.
But it's something where I try to have days that are a little bit more thematic, and it continues to be calibrated and recalibrated.
And I would imagine as you get close to the conference each year, and we just that just passed, like that mix probably changes a little bit, right? So
oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think even, I mean, like I'll cancel therapy clients that are weekly. I'll cancel them the week of the conference and the week after the conference typically. Consulting clients, I'll try to schedule out further. So I make sure that I've put them into time slots that still work, so that there's a huge focus for the couple of weeks of the conference, that's all I'm focusing on. But even a couple of months ago, I stopped taking new clients because I wanted to be able to focus my attention on the conference.
Got it. And so you're just giving yourself permission to focus on one or two things at a time, and like everything else kind of takes a back burner. The marketing might take a back burner, or other
Sure.
things. Got it.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I think it's hard. And it was something that was a little bit painful for me because I wanted to be getting more clients for all three businesses at all times. And that's not feasible. And even if things slip in through the cracks, there's definitely been times when I didn't listen to that and I didn't show up in the way that I wanted to show up.
And then you end up overcommitted,
or clients that don't feel taken care of, or, the inquiry calls that you don't close because you're not as focused or available. Like, it's those types of things that I think can be problematic if you don't listen to what you're actually capable of accomplishing.
Got it. I hear often practice owners say, I'd really like to add a passive stream of income, because it sounds like this magical unicorn thing, a beautiful, beautiful clear stream with income, just cash coming down from it. In your experience, is passive income ever really passive?
I mean, I don't want to say no, although I think that's the very short answer. I think it really depends on the type of passive income that you are seeking, as well as the support you're willing to invest in. And so to clarify, if you want to put together a course, for example, and I had somebody talking to me about a course today, that's why it's on my mind.
It's on your mind.
There's all of the work to create it. So the idea is, of course, there's a lot of upfront work, right? Well, then once the course is created, the content, not necessarily even put up on a platform, that kind of stuff, clearly you are the creator of that content. And you're going to try to do the best that you can to record the videos or create workbooks, or, whatever it is. So you've created this course. Well, getting it to the platform, that may be part of it, or you may want to hire someone to do it.
Yep.
And then there's navigating the platform and making sure that the platform actually works for you. And then you have to market it so that you get people to purchase it, because it's not like, oh, I put up a course on my website and now it's selling out. It's like there's actually a launch, and there's a need to do all the marketing that gets people there. And then once you have students in this course, there are customer service issues, there's payment issues, there's all kinds of stuff. So if you are willing to do a course and do all the content and have someone put it on the platform for you, and then then market it for you, and then have someone also to manage the customer service, that could be pretty passive. But if you're thinking that you're going to take care of all of those things and it's going to be passive, I don't think that's really the case. There's always work you're going to have to put into it.
Yeah.
It's just the way that things work. I mean, sometimes you can, whether it's like licensing a course to someone that's going to pay you royalties, okay, that's passive. Like, you've done all the work and then now they're going to sell it and give you money for it, right? But it's looking at what actually it takes to do the thing that you're trying to do, that I think will help to determine, is this actually passive or not? I mean, I've heard group practice owners say like, oh, well, this is truly the passive income because somebody else is seeing the clients and I'm getting money for it. And yeah, I guess that's true. But that's if you've set up all the systems, have someone else doing all of the other pieces, and you don't have any management issues or any people that get sick or people that need to have, there's always something that attention and managing. It's just what level of that you are willing to do and how much it is probably going to take.
And in the case of group practice, often, sometimes it does get to that point, right? Where it is passive and the owners, you're working 5 to 10 hours a week in the business. And but it's taken also years to get to that point.
Years.
And usually, if one piece of that system falls, right, like the clinical director quits or leaves,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden it's not passive anymore, right? The owner's
Sure.
brought back in, but more often than not, it's an owner working. They might not be seeing clients, but they're still working 40 hours a week in the business, like seeing clients or recruiting or HR, or billing issue, or whatever, maybe. Yeah. All right, Katie, this is a question I ask all of my guests. What is your favorite business or finance book and why?
So this is a book I talk about a lot. And I don't even know if it's technically a business book, but it's a book that just completely transformed the way that I look at how to do things. And it's called When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing by Dan Pink. And so I love this book because it actually looks at solving the problem from the angle of timing versus anything else. And so when I talk about like optimal performance or different things so that people are able to create schedules that work for them, that kind of stuff, I talk about stuff that's kind of towards the beginning of the book. When do you take breaks? How do you start your day? When do you plan your meetings? That kind of stuff, like looking at the science around when you're going to get the best bang for your buck with your brain, with the work that you're doing, with decision making. You definitely want surgery in the morning, for example, because if you get it in the afternoon, they're more likely to make mistakes and find less things, stuff like that. So it's just kind of really looking at what goes into how people behave differently at different times and how you might feel differently at different times. But I went back to look at it specifically for this question for you.
Ooh, thank you.
Because it also talks about the wins of finance. And looking at, and so I'm thinking specifically for folks right now, and I hate to say it because it's very, very pessimistic, but people who start their careers during economic downturns are more likely to make less money throughout their career.
I did not know that. That's so interesting.
And so it talks about the wins of when you start something, setting up kind of different timelines for how you create like markers that you actually feel motivated by. We're most motivated right at the beginning and right at the end. So if you don't have any kind of markers in the middle, you're going to get really unmotivated. So there's so much that goes into how we time things, whether it's our schedule or even when we start something that impacts us greatly, and it can actually impact our bottom line, that I wanted to just throw that part out because I think it's something we don't think about. People are, and Dan Pink talks about this in the book, but people will try to solve problems they'll throw a lot of things at problems, like teenagers going to school super early in the morning. Like they'll try to get more tools to help them focus. And it's like, well, no, if you just started 2 hours later, they would get enough sleep, they would be focused, and it would be no problem. And it's like, if we just started thinking about the timing of things and when we do things, we can actually solve a lot more problems. So it's a pretty focused book on timing. However, it completely changes the types of energy you experience, and so that you can actually get a higher return on investment for the time you spend doing something versus, kind of banging your head against the wall and like, why can't I focus? Well, it's because it's, I think it's
the
like
wrong time.
2:55 or 1:55 is like the worst time of day. Like, it's just like, and you have to watch your own timing throughout the day, but it's something where being able to assess when you're doing things can make a huge difference to all of the things that we value: time, energy, effort, focus.
That is fascinating. So I'm a super morning person. I love to, my alarm usually rings around like 4:10. That's kind of my time of day.
Wow.
And my best work is done before 7 a.m. Like that's my,
perfect.
But I'm going to read that book in that and see like, if I can find something out about myself, like that must be my time. But I think that would be really,
certainly
really
a morning lark. Absolutely.
Yes. Like that's considered almost like middle of the night. Right. But I enjoy my 4 a.m. wake up call.
I think you should, and the fact that you're listening suggests many positive things.
Very good. Well, so Katie, thank you so much for your time. Tell our listeners where they can find you and your podcast and your conference.
So the easiest thing is finding me on my main website, which is katievernoy.com. You can learn about me and the different things that I do. There's like a little buttons that go off to my therapy website or my coaching website, which is evolvetothriveconsulting.com. And then the podcast and the conference are housed on therapyreimagined.com.
Perfect. And we will link to all of those in the show notes as well. Right. Thank you so much for joining me today. I loved chatting with you.
I had so much fun.
Hey listeners, have you been thinking of adding revenue streams to your practice? If so, head over to therapyforyourmoney.com. I've got a list with all the revenue streams I chatted about with Katie and a bunch more for you to check out as well. Talk soon. If you need some accounting help, head over to therapyforyourmoney.com and click on the Green Oak Accounting button. There you can find out lots of information about my accounting firm and all of our specialized services for private practice owners.
The information contained in this podcast represents the host and guest's general opinions and should not be construed as personalized accounting and tax advice. Listeners should consider all facts and circumstances before applying this information and seek appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. Any info provided does not constitute accounting, tax, or legal advice.